also they are the critical champions and managers of a critical landscape in terms of natural resources. That is the bedrock of food production. However, we also note as of 2023 that when you look at climate financing, only 1.4% of global climate finance really went directly to support these frontliners. So the conversation really today said what this particular shortfall will mean for actualizing the aspirations that are entrenched in the NDCs. As we now know, we are in NDC 3.0. So with that responsibility of our producers who are also failing to invest in small-scale farming, but also their communities to really championing and looking at the food system vulnerabilities, increasing the emissions, undermining the adaptation goal, as well as widening climate inequalities with this financing gap. So this session will really interact and engage with distinguished panelists who are going to share with us what innovative financing models really exist to change the narrative, but also what needs to be done or it's being done to shape and overcome the structural barriers that are entrenched in channeling funds to the front line to deliver effective, just as well as scalable pathways for climate action. And lastly, on really how do we then move from principles, because we understand the locally led adaptation principles, to now action, because we are at this time at an implementation COP. So how does it take, what takes for us to move from principles to practice with locally led adaptation? So we have a panelists that are four, so I will invite them to join the session here. First up would be Pamidzai Bota, who is the program manager at Solidaridad, to join us. So we welcome Pamidzai to come and join us, and let us give her a round of applause. And that's the extensive and seasoned experience that she has in working with smallholder farmers. Secondly is May Ong, is the senior researcher at International Institute for Environment and Development. So she will also share with us, because we are evidence-based and driven action around local-led adaptation. So with the experiences and the data and the evidence that's coming out, she's going to share with us with practical ways on how we can move a needle towards action. Then third, we have Philip Kalonzo, who is the head of policy, advocacy, and communications at the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. So he was going to also share with us how PAGJA is influencing the trajectory on making sure that financial flows really get to where they matter most. And last but not least, we have Blessings Mwale, who is the director for Total Land Care, also to share with us some of the community-driven programming that are really shaping the course of locally led adaptation. So because I understand that towards the end, some of the panelists will leave, I will request that we'll take our group photo at the start before we go into the conversation. So I will request them to just that if we can have the group photo now, so that then we take it to the conversation. So all right, thank you so much. So we'll dive straight into the discussion now. And I'll call upon May, first of all. So you've been leading, a leading voice actually from IID on locally led adaptation. So from your experience, what is the most persistent structural barrier preventing action and moving a needle on locally led adaptation?
Thank you very much. So I can introduce our work a little bit so you
Yes.
can get a sense of what our context is. I work on promoting the locally led adaptation principles. There are 8 principles that have been agreed on and built together with a social movement of national governments, civil society organizations, women's groups on what are the factors that make locally led adaptation. And they are things that include more flexible financing, but also talk about greater recognition of smallholder farmers, communities at the heart of decision making. So the locally led adaptation principles include a different range of asks from the social movement that wants to put communities who are most affected by climate change at the center of decision making and in the front seat of driving climate adaptation. So what we understand are the challenges in climate finance are 2 things. First is the quantity of climate finance, and those are just the number, the amount of money that goes straight into the hands of farmers, but also the quality of climate finance, how it is, the conditions attached to the money that is that going into the hands of farmers. So let me speak a little bit on the quantity of climate finance. We know persistently that smallholder farmers struggle with financial access. And some of the, I'll give you some statistics from CPI from 2019 to 2020. So small scale agricultural systems just get 0.8% of total climate finance flows across all sectors. This is less than 1%. So we're seeing very tiny amounts of money trickling to small scale agriculture, even though your statistic shows that 85% of smallholders are making 25% of the food worldwide. 19% of climate finance goes to agri-food systems in general. So this is a small amount in comparison to the larger scheme of things. And money that goes to agri-food systems is public money primarily. And so this means that we need to see the private sector step up in delivering finance to agricultural systems, agri-food systems. Now let's talk a little bit about the quality of climate finance. Smallholder farmers persistently face issues accessing loans because they don't have assets to show collateral. They have issues with financial literacy. They are quite fragmented, and so they don't get the access to the loans and the finance that they need to. And we know that smallholder farmers take on massive amounts of risk. They cannot upfront money because their streams of money are very irregular. And so quality of climate finance means that we need investment in smallholder farmers that is persistent and long-term. Farmers are taking risks season after season, and they're not going to get immediate results. So we need finance to be patient and predictable. And this is what one of the locally led adaptation principles talks about, that this is the quality of finance that we need to see. And access to finance needs to be improved for smallholder farmers as well. As I mentioned before, smallholder farmers they have low financial literacy, they have low or scant collateral, and lenders find it difficult to reach smallholder farmers. So we need more concerted effort and also greater aggregated and cooperative power that can negotiate on the behalf of smallholder farmers so that they can access the finance that they need to take the risks that they are facing in relation to climate change. So I'll stop here for now, and then we can have more discussion later. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, May, for really bringing those insights, the gloom in it, and what is it that we need to do to move the financing to more accessible, dealing with the quality, but also the quality of financing that smallholders are facing. So now we'll turn to Pamidzai, who works with on the front lines with the smallholder farmers. So we understand that Solidaridad works with the smallholder farmers to really unlock some of the incentives mechanisms like carbon markets and support more income diversification that really strengthens the farm and household resilience. So maybe based on your experience, can you share what sort of approaches have been most effective to channel financing and incentives for smallholder farmers to really scale up locally led adaptation?
All right. Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. Maybe just to introduce myself, I'm Pamitai, and I work for Solidaridad, which is a civil society organization. And our main focus is to build the capacity of smallholder farmers so that they can produce sustainably, but also in balance with nature. So, with the aspect of producing in balance with nature, we look at initiatives that are locally led, but also sustainable for the environment. So our focus mainly are with smallholder farmers. And I think with the points that my colleague has mentioned, farmers need to be organized for them to have access to climate finance. I think we know that our smallholder farmers are scattered. And like she mentioned, most of our smallholder farmers really have less financial literacy. So you find that you need to build their capacity for them to understand investment and also farming as a business. So our approach is to build their capacity to understand that, but also build their capacity to produce in a sustainable manner. So we have been implementing different projects as Solidaridad, one of which is the cotton project, where we're trying to utilize waste from the cotton that they make to produce voucher that is going to help them become more climate resilient. I think we are all aware that the past 2 years, Southern Africa, or just in Africa, we were affected by El Nino, which resulted in drought in most of the areas. So we come in to offer capacity for farmers to produce and know what kind of activities or initiatives to do for them to become more resilient to climate change and some of the stress of climate change, like I mentioned, the drought. So our work focuses more on that. And with that application, we know that farmers can now benefit for doing the good practice that they're doing. So now we are now getting into a space where they can try to get additional funding, more finance towards their productivity through carbon credits. So with the application of voucher, it's able to capture the carbon, and that can make the farmers gain extra income through carbon payment. So we have a project that has been looking into that. But also, I also want to mention that besides such projects, we also need to make sure that we help them with market. So they've produced and they are producing in balance with nature, but also at the end of the day, if there's no ready market for them, it means that they're not going to improve their livelihood. So we also focus on market linkages for our smallholder farmers. We as Solidaridad also just don't end on that. We want to make our farmers more resilient by making sure that we provide some of the structural support that can help them withstand or become more adaptive to climate change. So with smallholder farmers, a little support through finance in structure development can really help them. So we support farmers in terms of supplying them with maybe boreholes in areas where there's no water, and you find that they rely on rainfall, and during after season, they don't have anything to do, find that they lose their livelihood. So what we support them with is to support them with water sources, which can sustain them to start producing off-farm initiatives. And one of the initiatives that we're doing is just a simple support towards the production of mushroom. So mushroom doesn't need much. So our smallholder women farmers who are heavily dependent on rainfall and agriculture find that off season they're able to do other activities like production of mushroom, which we've seen over the long time that it's improving their livelihood, but also helping them have an income at the end of the year, throughout the year. So those are some of the initiatives that we do as Solidaridad, but our focus mainly on three things: sustainable production and market linkages for farmers to benefit from the entire production cycle. We all know that our farmers produce much of the raw materials for the most industries, food industries. So if you don't support them throughout the year, you find that it also affects not just the farmers, but also the private sectors and those that are in the manufacturing of food industry that rely on the raw materials that the farmers produce. So it is very important to invest in the smallholder farmers for us or for the community or for the globe at large to have sustainable value chains. So that is what we do as Solidaridad.
Thank you so much, Pam, for raising those important points that you are looking at justice, addressing structural challenges, but also really looking at the whole ecosystem into which the farmers are operating in and enhancing and introducing those, but also looking at what else can happen within the ecosystem by diversifying their livelihoods into other income sources to keep the livelihoods going. So I think because we are really now talking about movement and social justice issues entrenched within this conversation, we'll move now to Philip, who is from the Pan-African Climate Justice Network, to really share with us how can regional institutions or networks and coalitions better ensure that climate finance flows and are aligning with both the climate goals, but also the social justice nature of this conversation. Philip, please share with us, but also you talk us more on what PAGJA is doing in the space.
Thank you so much, Madam Moderator, for the opportunity. At the onset, I'll start by appreciating my two dear sisters. They've really meant quite an elaborate presentation, but that again gravitates around issues of social justice, and which I'll also be looking into as I articulate my case. I think allow me to begin by first noting that if we are talking about social justice, we have diverse typologies of smallholder farmers. So when we talk about smallholder farmers, they are not uniform. They vary in contexts, and their issues and their needs again vary in context, and therefore it's important first we take that into account in all the conversations that we have. And largely institutions that work with farmers end up targeting the active farmers, the typology of farmers that I actually call active, guys who are already either in innovations, guys who are either leading in climate action or even in agricultural action, the innovators, those guys who are model farmers, and the rest. There is quite a wide typology comprising youth, women, persons with disabilities, the landless, people who are actually struggling with the basics, who are left out in the conversation around agricultural processes. But then first and foremost, connecting it with the finance question, because I want to gravitate there and then come downwards, because I'm a farmer, I'm likely to get stuck at the farmer level. It's to appreciate that at the global level, the strife to ensure that climate finance reaches farmers has not been heightened sufficiently to the level that it deserves to be heightened to. It's only 2 years, and in the context of Africa, when the global climate, the Green Climate Funds, GCF, began an affirmative action largely through the Angra Foundation to begin to see how they can start granting some small resources to farmers at that particular level. In the last 3 years where PAGJA has played an observation role, we've also done a bit of affirmative action instead of asking the hard questions to allow global institutions such as UNFAO to access some little resources to support agriculture-related work within specific countries in Africa. When we say affirmative action, is because those are the institutions that have actually put the agriculture agenda within the global space in terms of funding. And therefore that begins to explain the nature of gap and the kind of gap that is there in terms of funding agricultural sector from multilateral climate funds, and a gap that we need to look at how best and how quickly we should resolve it. Having said that, then it's important again also to appreciate the fact that even those big institutions, the multinational corporations that receive much of the climate funds that are meant for agriculture, do not trickle down to the communities that need it most. Without naming an institution, way back, I think 2010, I worked on a program with another institution that I had not named for security reasons. And actually, 5 out of 6 of the budget was actually being spent on administrative. It's just a sixth of the budget that was also was largely trickling to the country level for implementation. And that begins then to speak to the kind of overall that needs to happen at the global level in terms of the multilateral funds for them to flow down at speed and scale. Meaning that we need a shift, a quick shift in terms of the accreditation process so that we have farmer institutions, farmer organizations at country level being accredited and being able to receive climate finance. But let's first put this in context. If these institutions are asked to demonstrate their climate rationale, if they are asked to demonstrate the commercial viability of their initiative, it's going to go flat. It's not going to be funded within the multilateral fund. It's actually going to go flat, and therefore the opportunity to finance that action will be lost. And therefore there is much more transformative work that needs to be done within the policy framework, but also the national accreditation process to center the interest of farmer organization. And when I talk about farmer organization, I'm talking about farmer organization with the granularity that I began to describe, so that we are able to see the various stratas, the various typologies of farmers, their capabilities, their gaps, and how to address those gaps within the design of the proposal itself. And that needs a mechanism, strong mechanisms at the country level for coordination. And therefore, reversing the conversation a bit and coming to the national level realm, then we begin to look at the entire accreditation process, which so far has actually focused on government institutions and largely, again, banks. And the gap that is there in terms of accrediting national level institutions, farmer institutions, and civil society to drive climate action. And that is where we need to exert a lot of weight and a lot of pressure. I keep struggling then when you bring in the climate rationale, when you bring in elements that have to do with justification of commercial viability of agricultural enterprise, where agroecology will sit within that particular space, which is important. But then currently there is a conundrum that is also emerging under the climate financing, especially as you bring in the carbon markets as opportunities to finance the front lines, the communities who are dealing with conservation, agriculture, and the rest. The land question remains a glaring issue, and the vulnerability of communities to land grabs is increasing day in, day out. But equally, the carbon market project seems to target just a small fraction of the community, those in the fringes of public forests, and those forests that require, again, conservation and a community. But the vulnerable segment, again, cannot be seen within such a purview. So we have quite a huge segment of farmers within the pastoral setup that are still grappling to be onboarded and bringing imperatives around climate justice that need to be addressed, particularly as you bring in carbon markets. I do a lot of tree growing, and of late we've been incentivized to grow trees in the spirit of sequestering carbon. But when we see the little amount of resources that is trickling to farmers who are growing the trees under the carbon schemes, then I'm left wondering, where is the justice element? Because what I'm being provided for is a tree seedling, not anything else. It's just a tree seedling. Where is the justice when an intermediary is actually profiteering from the entire scheme, and I'm not even being supported to water the tree, to nurture the tree, and all these things. So there is quite a lot of injustices if you now reconfigure the financing for farmers, and particularly fruit tree farmers, from a carbon market perspective, and this needs to be looked into. Now, as we speak, then the carbon border adjustment mechanism then begins to come in not only to disfranchise, but also to restrict market access. Farmers are doing their own investment, hoping that they will be able to land lucrative market, but their practices thereof are being again cross-examined in terms of the carbon emissions, and again impacting on the level of investments farmers have to do to reduce their carbon footprint, which is a consideration that needs to be taken on board as we discuss about financing in terms of how do we support farmers again to reduce carbon footprint so that they are not punished by the markets. I want to stop there.
Thank you so much. I think you really raised quite a lot of equity questions there. And really to say if we are to mobilize and organize ourselves in dealing with these structural entrenched systems, there are multi-layers that we need to intervene on. First, at a global level, in looking at how then do we begin to dismantle to make accessibility possible. And also at a national level, let us look at the policy frameworks, but also the accessibility frameworks that are there. And really center to say, we also recognize there is elitism in the process, even within the institutions that are supposed to receive as well as to channel this funding. So these are some of the important questions that we need to raise. And with that, we go to Blessings Mwale, who is from the Total Land Care, to really share with us some of the lessons and experiences that they have in really driving climate resilient solutions and practices that are channeling and really channeling funding towards action that is being led by the smallholder in their different framing and putting equation on women, youth, as well as people with disabilities in the equation. Blessings, over to you.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. You've already introduced myself. I'm Blessings Mwale, the Executive Director for Total Land Care. Total Land Care has been in operation for over 25 years. We are in Malawi, but we have also a footprint in Zambia, Mozambique, and Tanzania. This question of locally led adaptation or climate action, I think let me start by saying that climate action cannot be there. It must be bottom up. Why I'm saying bottom up, I think in agreeing with my previous discussant, it's the farmers that are supposed to get the money. But I think my last colleague here talked about the multi-layers. Even if the money comes, but the proportion of the money that goes to the farmer is very small to make any meaningful impact. What Total Land Care has learned over these years in terms of how can we make sure that the resources that we get, they actually reach the farmer. I think it's an issue of let's shift the power, not just the language. Let the farmers be the decision maker. How do we do it? We make farmers to be the co-creators of the project, because we believe the project design actually determines the impact design. So if the design of the project is in such a way that most of the resources, or very little resources, are going to the farmers, then we can't talk about the local climate action. In addition, as we have said, the moderator, to us also we believe in inclusivity. In the discussion of the design of what we need to do, we have to involve women, we have to involve the youth. In TOC, we have adopted a principle, what we call FIPIC process.
FIMIC.
Free prior informed consent. We cannot implement the programs before actually we can talk to the communities that they tell us what are the problems and what are the solutions. So we have to deliver based on the problems, based on the solutions, what the communities are actually saying we should do. So in a nutshell, all we are saying is, and our lessons learned, is that let's trust the local institutions that we can actually channel resources, but also it must be coupled with capacity building. So that the farmers are able to motivate, to innovate, farmers are able to scale up adoption, and farmers are able to be accountable. Let me rest my submission, madam. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think that also raises the question to say, in the current NDC 3.0, do we have tenants of FIPIC in there, so that they're really driving this process. And then because now we are dealing with an issue of trust, how do we entrench trust in the political, financial, material systems within channeling financing? So I'm going to go back to the panelists on a round of final questions and their reflections. But before we do that, we don't want to do injustice to our audience here. If you've got reflections and questions, I'll give you an opportunity now to say, with all that we've heard, how then do we really move from the crisis to the catalyst in as far as achieving practical, locally led adaptation in the different communities and the different formations that we have? So anybody who'd want to share their reflections now and questions to the panelists? Anybody? Yes. Yes.
So, hi everyone, my name is Anik. I'm CEO of Moy Analytics from Singapore, a sustainability analytics company. I really appreciated some of your comments on where the money needs to go, right? The money needs to eventually go down to the farmers, right? But the issue is that right now, CBAM, etc., like eventually it's large corporations that are exporting. They're the last line of the chain. They're the ones who are facing the taxes. They're the ones who are sort of like have the resources to connect with green unlock green finance for themselves. But the thing is, the money needs to somehow flow into the supply chain. However, the issue is that if you really want that money to go to the supply chain, what's going to happen is that those large corporations are going to have to find out sensitive information about those supply chains, and then there's a power imbalance that is going to happen. I don't need to explain how it happens, but you know that would happen, right? Imagine they're asking who's your supplier, like that's not gonna be helpful for those like small farmers, right? There's going to be a massive power imbalance, but how can what we really need is a way for us to gather that information and allow the information to be used to identify where the money needs to flow while protecting the rights of these smallholder farmers across the supply chain. And then this methodology also needs to be able to take that green finance and flow it through the supply chain. So the large companies, they know that, okay, I know somewhere in my supply chain I can reduce emissions. I know what's it's going to cost. I'm happy to pay that because it's lower than the tax for CBAM. And then they can unlock green finance where the banks, etc., can go directly to the farmers. And the farmers are the ones that say, hey, I can do this, I can do that. So that's the kind of like methodology that we really need, because right now the way we are seeing it done is either it gets stuck, or maybe what's happening is that you have these large corporations, let's say for example Levi's or Walmart, they're like going through the whole supply chain, right? So maybe like could you comment on like maybe if methodologies and tools such as this would be helpful, because that's one of the things that we're working on and trying to see whether this would be useful. A tool such as this, methodologies such as this would be useful.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? Anybody? All right. Thank you so much for that. And I think you raised an important conversation on open data and who is owning the information, because without information, how then do you participate in these global value chains? And then you also begin to question at what position really are the recipients of the funding within the global value chains, or what should we be doing at national level in dealing with the national or global value chains or regional value chains? So it's another whole conversation. So we'll go back then to you, May, to really then also just put it all together, but also maybe reflect on what he has said on this conversation, especially now centered to COP30, as we are looking at this as an implementation COP. So what needs to really happen, and how can you reflect on the funders issue?
Great. I'll try to answer both of those questions together. So I agree. What needs to happen is that the profit margins that corporations are getting, which are around 25%, needs to be translated to what smallholders are getting, which is 1 to 4%, which is very tiny amounts. And there is, I think, an accountability issue, right? It's very hard to trace how much and why is going to the local level and where the money gets lost in that value chain. And I work a lot with mostly public finance, and we are trying to understand how much climate finance from donors, government donors, is going to the local level. And that is very hard because the data is very opaque. So developed countries will report to this OECD DAC database, and then they can tag it in any way they want. They can tag an infrastructure project as a locally led development project. I think there's an opportunity in the agriculture sector because it's maybe there are opportunities using Bitcoin technology or not Bitcoin technology, blockchain technology or something better where we can trace the flows of finance and the profits to the local level. And I haven't seen a lot of discussion at this COP around the use of technology to have that improved accountability, and that is a bit of a missed opportunity. And also big data, AI. There is demand from, I live in the UK, and there is demand from consumers to have fairer wages and more ethical standards, buy better quality goods, organic goods, to the local level. And what is happening is that supermarkets are putting the accountability and auditing onto the companies themselves. So they spend a lot on assessing smallholder farmers and trying to see, are you actually growing organic goods? Are you actually getting fair wages? But all of that money spent on auditing should actually be given to, translated as wages to smallholder farmers themselves. So yeah, big companies are spending a lot of overhead costs on accountability rather than translating it into farmer household incomes and fairer wages. So yeah, I would love to see better technology of tracing finance to the local level. And there is an opportunity there in the agriculture sector because the supply chains already exist. The Stockholm Environment Institute has used big data successfully to trace down to the most local province, local production area, where a product is coming from. So for example, you can look it up, it's called TRASE. You can see where soybeans are being produced and where they're being exported to. So what I buy in the UK, I can trace down straight to the local level of where it's being produced in Brazil. And that kind of information linked to fairer wages, better household incomes for farmers would be a very, very powerful tool. We just haven't seen it yet. And I really love to work with an organization that does do that.
Thank you so much. And I think that opens up room for further conversation, but also then to see how can they begin to traceability, accountability, and really looking at it in a bigger scheme, decent work, fair value distribution within this chain. So we'll go to blessings to really say how then do these inform future finance mechanisms to reach smallholders, and your general perspective also reflecting on the question on the floor.
Thank you so much. Actually, I wanted it to reflect from the carbon financing point of view. We do implement carbon projects in Malawi. And recently, the government just launched a regulatory framework. And that regulatory framework is very clear in terms of how the benefits will be shared. I think that's one way of narrowing it down in terms of how much do we really want to go to the communities versus the different layers in between where the money is actually stuck. So I think from a regulatory point of view, I think that's to me a very welcome development because any carbon investor or developer needs to come very clear in a memorandum of understanding. That will be very clear in terms of if there is an implementing partner, like Total and Care, how much will that go to Total and Care? and how much will go to the communities directly, so that they actually maintain and implement those particular nature-based solutions. So I think that's, to me, one way of circumventing the challenges that we are saying. Money is stuck somewhere else and very little is going to the ground.
Yeah.
In fact, my point I wanted to emphasize that actually the challenges that we're talking about financing, it's not mainly on the farmers, it's on the cooperatives. And that's where, to me, I'm saying that the regulatory framework that the Malay government has put together, I think it's a positive way forward in terms of how do we want to unlock this money going to the communities. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Let's look at best cases, learn from them, and then scale up and see how we can track. So we go to Philip Pakcha. And I think what is still disturbing us in this conversation is the 1.4% falls that are going towards from global climate finance that are reaching agriculture. So what accountability mechanism should we be pushing for collectively to ensure that we demand climate finance that makes sense and that moves a needle in the lives of our people?
Thank you so much, Madam Moderator. Allow me to begin with the carbon markets, because the carbon market is quite important. And during the Second African Climate Summit in Addis Ababa, we charted a transformative pathway on the carbon market. It seems the conversation in the rooms that I'm attending are missing still that board pronouncement. And the pronouncement is that Africa must be at the center of the governance of resources from carbon proceeds. And being at the center of governance from the carbon proceeds, it means if countries in Europe are taxing their private sector players for carbon emissions, then Africa should be able to know how much has been generated from the proceeds and how will that trickle down. Because remember, it is us who is sharing our carbon share, our carbon budget share. It's not Europe. And therefore, those resources need to be ring-fenced through a straight forward-looking mechanism, not through intermediaries that we are speaking about. So that when we talk about the basket of resources that are reaching those in the front line, it makes sense. As it is, doesn't make sense. So we need, first and foremost, to press that button hard so that we are able to get quite substantial share of resources. Europe has no business keeping resources from carbon taxation. Why is it keeping it? Why is it taxing it? Whose budget, carbon budget are they using? They are utilizing carbon budgets of other countries. So we need first to think transformatively in terms of how we get to that space. And that requires board movement building in that particular regard. And that is why Pakcha, working with others, have actually thought through the whole organizing of non-state actors movement, looking at the movement of farmers, but also beginning to look at the intersecting issues. How do you connect farmer movement with water movements? How do you connect farmer movement with those dealing with climate and health? So that you are able to build quite a critical mass around the transformation that needs to happen in agriculture. How are you connecting farmer movements with those working on issues of peace and security? Because livelihoods vulnerability sits at the center of climate insecurity. So really, those interconnections are quite important in terms of building a critical mass of institutions driving the transformation. But then at the national level, Pache initiated the African Designated Funds Network, AFDAN, and which has grown in leaps and bounds. And part of the transformative approach that we are actually proposing within the management of the designated funds is around accreditation and the increased access of multilateral funds to local institutions. And I think that is a button that we need to press quite hard. It's not sufficient to have UNFAO receiving resources, and we are not against them receiving. It's not sufficient to have ANGRA receiving resources meant for agriculture. It's not sufficient. And it's not transformative. So we need to look at models that then begin to cascade those resources downwards and make them accessible to communities. Part of the reform agenda that we've been able to drive within GCF and also other multilateral funds is to center country leadership in the governance of these resources. What does country leadership then mean in terms of access to the resources? This is what we need to fundamentally ask in terms of driving our transformative agenda and ensuring that women movements or movements of women farmers, youth farmers, farmer movements are able to access these resources and implement the transformative intervention at the front line. I think at the global level, it's high time we began to look at whether the pie can be shared. That is at global level. And when I talk about sharing of the pie, I'm looking at the sharing of the pie in regard to ring-fencing resources for adaptation at global level, ring-fencing resources per regions, so that we are not having one region receiving more resources than others, and ring-fencing resources also per country. Because when we look at access to climate finance, even within the continent of Africa, we have variations among countries based on their capabilities. But the disparity is the most vulnerable country receive less. So how do we correct that through a ring fencing mechanism? But now within the ring fencing, and particularly for adaptation, begin to look at the global goal on adaptation and begin to look at the various thematic areas, the various sectors, and ask how do we then also ring fence those resources and ensure there is appropriate channeling mechanism within the country level. The statistics that we have, and I know, Madam Moderator, the statistics that you are alluding to are also globally done, not necessarily done within the context of Africa. How do we localize those statistics so that it makes sense in terms of how much is going to agriculture in country X in Africa, as opposed to having a board, and how much is actually going to regenerative, agroecology oriented, sustainable agricultural practices. So we need to break it into nuts and bolts rather than, again, the current practice, because remember, we are losing one element. The UNFCCC framework as it is a party kind of arrangement. The party kind of arrangement does not favor resources to trickle down to communities. It still favors what state prefers. So we need to move from the state preference in the implementation of the Paris Agreement to what the community and the farmers' preference are in terms of support. And that's where we need to get in terms of transformation. Thanks.
Thank you very much for sharing that and really putting a different framing into what agenda we need to continue to push and then what reforms we need at the different levels. So let's find with Pamidzai to really, after having listened to all this, what do we need to scale in terms of the local level, in terms of the measures, the tools that can begin to change the equity questions at community level with the farmers?
All right, thank you so much for that question. So I think when you talk about farmers and them really getting support at a local level, it is very important that the farmers are ready for that support. I think currently our farmers' data really, if you want to get data for a particular farmer, it's difficult to really narrow down what kind of practices are they doing and how can they be rewarded. So as Solidaridad, our approach is to first, as we start our intervention, we need to first digitally register them. We need to get their data in terms of the location, GPS, where they're doing the production. We need to get their more like bio to understand what kind of farming practices they're doing. And then even as we are doing our interventions, the farmer is able to see the growth of the farmer in terms of the practices that they're doing. And then on the back end, we're able to also recognize to say what kind of extra support do they need, because you have the location of the farmer. If they're having any stress with weather, you're able to advise them digitally to say, okay, in your area, I think you're going to have maybe heavy rainfall or maybe a drought. A farmer is able to prepare in advance because you're able to trace exactly where we're doing, what they're doing. So as an organization, we've invested a lot in such tools that are able to get data information from the farmer, but also for each and every practice that they do, they're able to also put back in our system the practices that they're able to do. So I think that's some investment that we've done as Solidaridad, and we feel that makes our farmers ready for any kind of support. I think we talked about traceability. So if you're able to trace back where the cotton or soybean is grown and what kind of practices are being done, you're able to use that system. So this particular farmer is able to produce in this manner. Savannah, they're applying this kind of chemicals. If you don't want any product that has got chemicals, then you know that's not a farmer to work with. But if you want organically grown products, you're able to trace back to say this is the particular farmer that you want to work with, and then they're able to benefit directly from the kind of support that you can give them due to their good practices. So that's what we're doing at Solidarity.
Thank you so much. And I think we need to give them a round of applause for all the insights they've shared. These insights are with us here in the room, but also the ones that have been following on the live stream outside. So these conversations are ongoing. But one key thing that is coming out to say, for us to really move from crisis to catalyst, there are different reforms and movements building that we need to do, but also to center our work collective action in ideologically framing that we can really see what is it that we need. In doing so, we need technology, we need tools, we need traceability, we need leadership at all levels, political leadership in the global spaces, political leadership everywhere, but also then institutional reforms and institutional strengthening that we need. So to wrap it up, this is now the close. I'll give them 1 second each. They can say their parting shots that we can now take it to the, as we go into the halls in the negotiation rooms. Let us keep this conversation forward. So 1 second each. What is your parting shot that you would like to send us with?
I think from our side, we're saying that the farmers are ready for the support. I think with what they're doing already, they really deserve to be supported because they put in quite a lot in their work.
May?
Just reflecting on what Philip was saying, that the UNFCCC process is not targeting farmers themselves, it's targeting national government. So we have to make sure that the work that we do uplifts the voices of farmers themselves.
Okay. Thank you. Philip?
We need to keep thinking through the creative mechanisms that we will put in place that enhance access. Definitely, funding and multilateral schemes will not reach those farmers unless we are innovative and creative. Patch has created a climate justice impact fund as a mechanism again to enable resources to trickle down to those communities who are at the front line, and it's such initiatives that need to be scaled up and amplified. Thanks.
Thanks. Blessings?
My last message is that we should all know that when the communities leads, then the climate action solutions last forever. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for being with us here. And since we have 1 minute as we walk away, I would hate it not to see you in our group picture. So let's all just get a picture together and then we walk to our different conversation. But let us keep the movement, and thank you so much for joining.